Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss Kubernetes config map and secrets objects. So we'll discuss what are these objects, what are they used for, what problem they solve, and how do we use these objects in Kubernetes. So we have our applications, whatever application we develop. Most of the application we need to pass some configurations. What are those configurations? For example, you want to pass database URL because it will be different in dev and in queue and production, or user ID or password or some certificates or things like this. So there will always be need, most of the time there will be need to pass such configurations to the applications because you don't want to hard code these things in your code. And as I already explained, some of these configurations will be varying based on the environment, dev environment, QA environment, and production environment. Now, how do you pass these configurations to the applications? One way is you can pass it as an environment variable, and your application can read that environment variable. So in dev, production, QA, etc., the value of this environment variables will be different, and accordingly the application will work. Other options is you can hard code, but it has own problem. Something changes, then you have to change the code, rebuild the code, redeploy the code, and things like this. The third option is you can have a configuration file. For example, in Java, you can have a properties file, and you can change the properties file. But then properties file is also part of your code or deployment. So if you want to change the properties file, you have to change the properties file first, redeploy the code, rebuild the code, redeploy the code. So you have to go through the whole cycle. But these are the few of the options wherein which we can use to pass the configuration. We discuss about Git repo volume. You can have the configuration in Git repo, attach it as a volume, and your application can read from there. But Kubernetes provides you a one object or one way to store this configuration. So store this configuration in a Kubernetes resource, and that resource which saves the configuration is called ConfigMap. Now there are certain configurations which are secrets. For example, the passwords, encryption keys, the private keys, for example. So you can save, Kubernetes provides you a resource called secrets. You can store such informations inside the secrets resources, secrets Kubernetes resources. Now, stepping back a little bit, how do you pass arguments to the application? Let's say you have a Maven Spring Boot application. So we'll work, under that assumption. So one way is you can pass using, command line. Second is you can pass, or maybe it's a normal Java, application also. So you can pass using command line, environment variable, config files. You can mount external files, or you if you say Dockerize, if you are building a Docker image out of it, then you have a Docker entry and command. We'll discuss about this as well. So these are some ways to pass configuration to the app. Now, what is Docker entry point? So you would have seen in the Docker intro also. This entry point is it defines the executable files to be executed during container starting. So when container is starting, this is shell script or whatever. It's Windows, possibly it could be exe also, but mostly for Linux it could be shell script. So that needs to be executed while container is starting. Now the CMD option in the Docker file is it indicates the arguments to be passed to the entry point, because this entry point might need to take some arguments. So you can pass that argument in the CMD, and you can define the default arguments here. Once you use a Docker run and pass the image name, it will use the default arguments which you have passed in the CMD. But if you use Docker run image and pass the arguments, then it will override the arguments which you have passed in the CMD option in the Docker file. This is just a refresher of your Docker file entry point and CMD. Now, Kubernetes can override a Docker command. So Docker Docker has entry point. In Kubernetes, equivalent is command. Docker has CMD, equivalent in Kubernetes ARGS, and we'll see example of that. So let's take this, application. This application is hosted here, and it has some controller. In this controller, it's a Spring Boot application, and this is the the DB URL, and we want to. This is a configuration which you want to take, and once you invoke this method, /tips, it will pass tips, and it passes the value of this DB URL. If you do not set any value, then the default value will be default host. So we will see how to set this value of DB URL using the configuration. So this is a sample example which we'll be using without Kubernetes. So if you run this application ambient spring boot :run, and so -d spring boot run arguments and pass this, arguments DB URL, whatever. And what is this DB URL? This is the DB-URL which you have given name here. The same name should appear here, DB_URL, and you can pass this. Once you run with this parameter, and this is without Kubernetes, as I said, and you get this wget Spring Boot application started, and use wget to get the tips, and you can see, it's passing this, the DB URL is MySQL or something. So tips MySQL, it's not giving the default host anymore. It's giving the host which we have passed from here. Correct? Don't go by the the syntax of JSON or something. The idea was to showcase how do you pass the arguments to Spring Boot application outside Kubernetes. And we'll run this example. Now in Kubernetes, we'll do the similar thing, but with Kubernetes. So this is a file, and it has a pod. It has, just some metadata, and label has I'm assigning some purpose also to this. Resources, I'm limiting to 1 CPU, whatever. This is what I want to focus on. This is a command which I want to run, correct? And while running this command, I want to pass these arguments. So these arguments are similar to what I passed outside Kubernetes. So when Kubernetes runs, I want to pass these arguments also. And once it runs Kubernetes, we'll go to the Kubernetes, and from inside container, we'll say, wget, we'll try to get this, we'll try to invoke the same URL in the controller. It should be /tips, and we'll see the output, correct? If you don't want to go from inside the container, you want to expose from outside the container, you can use port forwarding. And we have done this port forwarding in the previous videos, so you can follow that. Once this port forwarding is 8888 on local, will be forwarded to 8080 on this particular port. So, and then you say localhost :888/tips, it will return you the same result which we are getting from inside by using this command from inside the container. So let's just run this. Let's just run this example, and we'll see. We'll start from here. So this is the application tips controller, and it's inside this path. Tips, whatever code tips. So like go inside, I will go inside this. So I will say this is where the project is, and I will run the same arguments. So if I do this, sorry, let me exit this mode, and let me run this. So let's see what happens. Okay, allow. Done. So this is outside Kubernetes. I'm reiterating that again, and I will just run this command which I've given here, and let's see what it does. Okay, I can't copy this because an image wget localhost 8080. So let's do that here. Let me go to some temp directory. emp wget localhost /tips. So it returns some tips file to me. So let's see what is there in the tips file. And it is returning this MySQL, whatever this app which I passed as a parameter while running the Spring Boot application, right? So shutting it down, this is the parameter which I passed, and this is what is appearing here, correct? And how it's appearing here, because when I return in /tips, I say tips : DB URL, which is this URL, and I'm passing this as a parameter from as a configuration. The configuration, if it If it would not have taken that configuration, it would have passed a default URL to me. But it had taken the configuration, so it's passing the DB URL, which is passed to it. And then, of course, the first stick or whatever. Okay? Now, moving on. Let me put in slideshow again. And now, what we'll do is we'll run this command create pods args. Right. So, clear this out. kubectl. Let's see how many pods we are running now. kubectl get pods. No pods, good. kubectl create -f and then create pods args. Create pods args. So created. Let's see what is there inside this. Right, by the way, cat. It's the same thing, right? I'm running this this image, right, and then passing this command, and well, here in the command itself, I'm passing everything. Honestly, here I split it into commands in args. So here I'm passing everything in the commands. Let's see how this works. So whether I'm able to get this or not. Let's see. Yes, it will get ports. So you will go inside this port. I don't want to do port forwarding or anything. PXCC, IT, Java, Docker, Sketch, -f, bash. Correct. So now I say wget. I don't know wget works here or not. Let's say curl localhost :8080/tips. So it gives me the same thing which I have passed. So whether you use whether you use this commands and arguments separately, or you use this one file which has everything in the command, both will yield the same result. So I tried this. Maybe as a homework, you can try this as well. Now moving on from here, this is what we did. Kubernetes lets you specify environment variables also for each container in the pod. Defining environment variables at the pod level to be inherited by the containers. Is it possible? What I'm trying to say here is that, is it possible to define some environment variable at the pod level which any container inside that pod inherit? So it's not possible. So environment variables cannot be updated after pod is created. So now what we'll do is let's go through this. So you have this YAML file. It's kind of pod. It uses the same image, and these are the environment variables which I'm passing. And so we will create this YAML. We'll get the pods. We'll get the logs. We'll see what is in the logs, and we'll go inside the pod. We will not use pod forwarding. We'll just go inside the pod and use the curl command to get the thing, and we'll see whatever we have passed as an environment variable, does it get picked by the Spring Boot application and passed into this variable. So that's what we'll validate. Okay. So let's start. This we have done. So let's kill whatever pod we have already. So let me exit out of this and kubectl get pods. Oh, what is this? kubectl get pod. So I'll delete this kubectl kubectl delete pod. So I delete this pod. Now I should not be having any pod running, and I will use this create pods -env YAML file to create new pod. Let's see that file first. Cat k8 -pod, then -pods -e. So this is the same thing, right? Pod. Then this is the environment I'm setting. This is the environment variable name, and this is the environment value, and that's what things are same. Liveliness and everything we have discussed in the past. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create this. Sorry. kubectl create -f. Now let's see how many pods we have. This pod is running. So let's go inside this pool, inside this pod. ctl ex. Okay, so we are inside this code, and let's see what's the value. I never checked this, by the way, but I am checking this now. What about Kubernetes? Okay, host name, whatever language, Kubernetes for DB URL. This is the environment variable we had set here in this environment, and that's what is appearing here. But now let's see this environment. If you set an environment variable, this key and value, Spring Boot will automatically pick that up. But let's validate that. Curl URL wget localhost 00/. And you can see this value is appearing. It gets injected by the Spring Boot application automatically. Right? I don't know why it's terminated, but let's see this kubectl get code still running. So kubectl, and let's follow this. So we'll see get codes. Let's see logs. Logs anyway will tell you, what are the logs created while starting this pod. Java Docker sh. We can see running logs also, and let's see. Can I give pod and see the logs? So it shows the logs which pod created. Container inside the pod created while running. So now we have seen how do we pass this environment variable using Kubernetes to a Spring Boot application. Spring Boot application by default has, if you set this property in the Spring Boot application like this, if the environment variable, if there's any environment variable with this name, Spring Boot will automatically pick that up. So all we did was using Kubernetes, we set up one environment variable whose name is this and value is what we wanted to set. Right? So Spring Boot picked that up. And we validated using curl command that we are getting this value which we had set. Okay. Now we did all of that, but if you see pod YAML is also like a code, right? Because you will be running this same YAML again and again, right? So if the environment variable or value you want to change, you have to change the YAML, which is fine. You can change that, but this is also a code. This also needs to be changed, and the general preference is you want to keep the configuration outside the code. That's where ConfigMap comes in. It's a separate object in Kubernetes for the configurations. All it is a map. You can see the name itself, ConfigMap. It's a map containing some key value pair. Now the application which will develop, it need not know that where a config map even exists or not. It did not know that, and I will show you how. It just need to work with the configuration like it was, it would work without Kubernetes in place. Now this second line tells you how this gets achieved. So ConfigMap data is passed to the containers as either of the below. You can create the config map, put some key value pair, and then arrange to have those key values either available as an environment variable. Once it's available as an environment variable, we saw just now that Spring Boot will automatically pick that up, and similar should be the case with other frameworks also. Or you can pass this config maps as a files in a volume. If your application is picking the configuration file from a file, then you can do the config, create a config map, make the key value pair of config map available in a file on a volume, or you can pass this as a config map value as a command line arguments as also. Application can read config map from the see any object you create in Kubernetes, you can always read that object information from REST endpoint as well. Same is the case with config map. You can always have your application invoke the Kubernetes REST endpoint and read and pass this config map name and read the values. But then again, you are tying your application to Kubernetes. What if tomorrow you don't want to run it on Kubernetes, you want to run outside Kubernetes? So it won't work because you had made a tight coupling already. So we should avoid such tight couplings, right? So app accesses configurations by name, hence can use it to keep settings for different environment variables. So it's obvious, like any other application development, you always like db_URL, and that's the name. Whether this application runs in dev environment, QA environment, or in production environment, your application is always concerned, will always get the, will refer to DB underscore URL name. The value of it will be set differently in each environment, either using environment variable or just picking up from files or whatever, correct? So the how do you create config map? You can create config map using command line. Using kubectl, I have given an example. Oh, I forgot to put something after F. So you can create in YAML also. You can create using just create config map. So if you use kubectl create config map, this is a command you can use. Kubectl create config map, env config. Now it's env config is your configuration name, and you are taking this configuration from literal, which means the value of this the key value will be passed in the command line itself. So this is one value in this config map. So config map has a name, and this is a name, and this map considers a map name. This map is going to supposed to a key value pair, and these key value pairs are coming from this command line only. That's what from literal means. And what is the first key? JDBC URL. What is the first value? This is the value of this URL. So this map is going to contain this key, and this key is going to have this value. It can have many other from literals also. Like here, I am giving another example. You can have two key value pair in this environment configs. One is one is this key is this, value is this. For second, key is this, and value is this. And there are certain conventions. The names, these names should be lower cases, hyphen, dot, and it should start with alphanumeric. So let's see. We'll create some config and we'll inspect that config also. So let's remove it from this. Let me create one config map. I will use this. I will just copy paste this. I will go here. Create config map. It got created. Let me create another one also. It was environment config, and this is environment configs plural. So let me do this as well. Now what we're going to do is we're going to inspect this one by one. kubectl get config map. Let's see the first one. This is a YAML. We are telling give the YAML. If you have to create YAML, using, I was showing you this option, right? Create -f. You can create a YAML like this, and then it's kind config map at version 1 and give this information. Data inside this config map will be this key, this value. You can skip that if you want. These are only 3 things you can put in the YAML. It will get created for you. So you can see in the first, we have passed from the literal key and value, and same key and value is appearing here in the YAML with data and everything. Right? Now let's see the other config map with plural environment configs. Here we have set 2 config, 2 key value pairs. So same thing here. Data is first key, first value, second key, second value, type config map. So this is how it gets created. From the how config map creates it in the using the command line. Now config map consumption. So how do applications consume the config map, right? So you have created this config map with some key value pairs, which is appearing here. Now you want applications to consume it. You can set as an environment variable, or you can set it as a volume. Applications can read some key value keys from the environment variable. It can also read some certain other keys values from the volume as well. Here we'll see another example. So here what we are going to do is we are creating another variable here, and we are passing another system URL. It's another variable, and then we'll change the tips. Let me see if I already have it here. Another system URL where I'm using this Control F, Control V. Okay, I'm using tips all. Okay, let me do one thing. I will need to create the image and everything. So what I will do is I will call tips all, and we'll see the value of DB URL and another image URL, whether it is getting passed, correct? So it's a little different from what I'm showing here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create this config map, and I'm going to show this config map. Then This is the config map which I'll create, which will have, and then this config map will be created. Config map from, there's a YAML also, by the way, so I will see that YAML from the command line. And okay, so this is how it will look like. It's a type pod. We'll create the pod which will have this image, and these are the environment variables. These are environment variables. This is a name. The value of this is coming from config map reference key. Now, what is the name of the config map? This is the app-config. You see that name here. That name is, this is the name of the map. From this map, what is the value which we are putting into the environment variable? Correct. This environment variable name is dbu_url. The value is coming from config map. The name of the config map is app_config. The inside this config map, there are key value pairs. We want to get the value of this key, dev-jdbc-url, which we have created here, dev-jdbc-url, and that's the value which will come from. And we'll see, let's see, we'll see whether this value gets populated or not. So, okay, so let's run this, and we'll go to the other example after this. Okay, now we are here. So, kubectl, we are getting config map, and I just want to make sure the app, the name is app-config here, app-config, and dev-jdbc-url. It should be dev-jdbc-url. I give underscore here, so I here, but in this slide I have given -jdbc_url. So I will change this to -jdbc_url and then create this. Let's see what happens. Here, clear this out. Okay. What we said is we'll use hyphen and not underscores. So let's use hyphen, dev-jdbc-url. Let's see. Config map created, app-config map got created. Now, so this is a file. Kf config map env from, let's see what is there. Cat config map env from, and this is command line, right? Command line. Let's see what is here. So it's looking for this app config, which is this. It's looking for this dev-jdbc_url, which is this dev-jdbc_url. So we'll see this pod should have the, and then we'll see this pod created should have this environment variable created, whose value is coming from config map, from this config map with this key name, and it should populate into the Spring Boot application. So we'll see that getting populated. I'll repeat that cycle, repeat this flow again after I show you that it's working. So let's see if we have any pod running, get pod. We have pod running, so let's delete it. kubectl delete pod. So we delete that pod. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to create this pod. kubectl create -f. So my mistake. This one, YAML pod got created. Let's see kubectl get pod. Pod is running. kubectl exe. Let's go inside this pod. Curl localhost :800. We have set only one DB only, so I'll invoke only tips, and this value gets populated. So let me explain again what happened. First, we created a config map using this. Now, what is involved in creating this config map? This config map involves two things. One's a map name, which will have key value pairs. So this is the map name. And these key value pairs are coming from literal, which is command line only. This is the first key, and this is the value of this key. Correct, value of this key. This is the second key. This is the second key, and this is the value of this key. Right? That's how it's this how we are able to create, and you see this. Okay, now we created a config map with the name and the key value pair. Now we create a pod. Inside pod we are saying we want to create an environment variable. The environment variable name will be db underscore url, and it's the same name uh, which you are seeing here, db underscore url, so that Spring Boot can inject that environment variable automatically into this variable. So this is db url. Now, where is the value of this environment variable will come from? The value of this environment variable will come from a config map, and that config map name is the app config, which is this. And in that app config, there is a key called dev-jdbc underscore url, which is this. The value of this key in this config map will be the value of this environment variable. Right? The environment variable name is this. The value of this will be this value. Value of this key in this config map, and then Spring Boot will automatically inject this, and the value of this key in this config map is this JDBC whatever another test 3306, and it will become as an environment variable value of db underscore url. db underscore url is Spring Boot in the it's defined as here. So Spring Boot will automatically take it from the environment variable and set the value of this variable as this. Correct? So that's how it works. Hope it is clear. Now let's go back to our documentation. So now I'll create another. Okay, let's see. I create config map with 2, and I have said config map environment variable from command line. So this we have done. Now here I'm creating 2 key value pairs, but I'm defining only one in this YAML file. Maybe as a homework for you, you can define another system URL also in the environment variable, which will get injected into this another system URL, right? Another system URL. Make sure in the YAML file, the name of the variable of the environment variable is this another system URL. Like I had the name of environment variable, sorry, here in this environment variable. So you can have multiple environment variables. So one will remain this. Second, you can create whose name is this another system URL, and whose value will come from config map key. Config map will be app config only, and the key name will be this another system URL. So try that out and see if it's working. And after you do this, create this pod and invoke tips all method, and you'll see the DB URL and the system URL should be populated with whatever you have created in your config map. Okay, moving on. So this is what I explained. The config map on CLI. YAML takes the CLI from CLI config map. Pod creates apply sets to the app. This is what I just explained. This is what we just config map got created, and you can see the config. You can see this config map. We saw that also, right? Data with key value pair. We saw all of that. So you can get this config map. The map you created using YAML, or you can create config map using YAML only. In this YAML, you can pass only this information. Other metadata will be created by Kubernetes automatically. Right? Now, if you want to create a Kubernetes config map contents from a file, correct? So, so we will create Kubernetes config map from contents of a file. So here is how you do it. So kubectl create config map. Again, the config map name is a map name. From file, you give file name. So this file, whatever is the key value pair in the file, will automatically be populated into this map. How does this work? This command will look for file, a config file like this file, a config file.conf, in the same directory where from the command is being run, and save the contents. Once it finds that file, whatever is in this a config file.conf, it will save the contents of this file under key in this map. My config, there will be a key created with the key name will be the same name as the file name. The file name is used as a map key. You can also specify the custom key. So if you don't want the file name to be given as map key, so you can create an environment config from file, and here you can give your own key. In that case, it will not create the file name as a key, but it will take the contents of the file and put as a value from this. It will store the a config file contents under this key, right? You can use from file multiple times. You can use from file from a directory to directory also. Once once you use this from file and give the directory name instead of file name, all files config under the directory will be stored. File names will be used as the config keys, config key for each file. There will be multiple key value pairs. One key will be for one. Each file will have file name will be the key. Like say file 1, file 2, file 3. So file 1 will be the key, file 2 will be another key, file 3 will be the third key, and the content inside file will become the file 1 key values. Same with the file 2 and file 3. Right? File names with invalid config key will be ignored. So let's see how this works. So I'll delete all of this. So this is here. I'm just going through this. I'm deleting the existing pod. I'm deleting the all the config maps I created. Then there's a file which I created. Let's see if this file, there's a file cat db URL. This file has this content. So I'll create a config map. The map name will be my properties. It is creating from a file db URL because the file name itself is db URL. So it will get created. Then I'll be creating a pod. It's the same pod which is referring this, this is the pod. This config map environment from file content instead of command line, it will be coming from file content, and this is the pod. So environment from config file, and we are saying it just come from my properties. Config map is my props here, which is the same name here. This and this is same. And once I create it, then I can and this is the value db URL. This is the value from db URL file host whatever. So this should get injected into the Spring Boot application. Let me run through this. I will explain the process, what is happening here again. So what we'll do is we will just run through this example. So let's see how many config maps we have. So we'll exit this out. kubectl get on config. So I'll delete all of this. kubectl delete config map. This one config map. I don't know. App config did we create? I think we only created. This is created by Kubernetes, so we won't delete this. Config map deleted. Now let's see how many config maps we have. Only one created by Kubernetes. Now we'll create our this thing. Let's see if I have the db URL file still or not. I have it. So this is the content of the db URL file. Good. Now I'm going to create this my props config map. So kubectl create config map my props config map my props from file -f from file from file equal to, and this is db underscore only, yes, db underscore URL, and that's it. So my props got created, so you can see that. And one more thing that you wanted to show was this. Where did that go? This one. I want to see get config map into this thing also, my props. I want to see the YAML file. So it has kind of config. This is the key and this is the value, correct? So it created that config map with this key value. Now let's look at this file. Create config map from file content. Cat create config map from config map env from, and this is file content. F is small, file content. Let's see what is here. So it's referring to the same my props, which is this one. Config map means my props, right? And I might have specified, it might show the name in name here, my props. Right? This is what I will be referring into my pod YAML, right? My props and this becomes this becomes inside this container. This environment values, environment variable values are coming from this config map whose name is microbes. Correct? Now let's run this kubectl create openness. Okay, I already have port from the previous thing, so let me delete that port. Apparently, I'm keeping the port name same in different ports. So YAMLs, I should have changed it, but let me delete the existing port. kubectl delete port deleted. Get port. Now there's nothing. Now let me create that. Port created. Now I get this port. I see this port. Now if I now just reiterating that there is an environment variable, there are environment variable set from this config map my properties, and this my properties we created from a file, and whose content was I showed somewhere, whose content was somewhere. Where did I show that? This one, whose content is this. So this file has this content. From this file, I created a config map called my properties. And when I check this my config map, my properties, I see this is the key and this is the value. And from this key, from this config map key and from this config map value, I am creating a pod whose whose environment variables are coming from this from this config map my props. Now this pod has this image, this image which has this code, which is taking the value of this DB URL from environment variable. So let's see how this whole thing played out. Correct. So now we have this pod. So we will go inside this pod, kubectl exec, then wget, sorry, curl localhost :0/slash tips. So it shows this value DB from DB URL file host, right? And this is what I was showing you, the DB URL content somewhere, and it's not easy to file this. No. There's a DB URL cat. This one. This is the one, and this value has come from that file. Somewhere that file is there. I showed the cat, and you could see the cat also. So this is how the value of this environment variable got populated. We created a config map whose content got populated from a file. File just has a one line. The name of the file is the key. So Kubernetes config map has that key DB_URL and value as this. Then we created a pod. That pod created an environment variables from this same config map, and that environment variable, one of the environment variable had the key as DB_URL. So it got injected, the value of that got injected by Spring Boot automatically into that variable, and we in the controller class, and we got that thing, and we saw the value getting populated there. So that's from the file. So let's move on. I will just reiterate what I said. DB URL has below one line as a content. A config map with the name my properties created. From file option is used to create this file. We'll put from file option is used to refer this file, actually not create this file, to refer this DB URL file. What it will do is it will put the content of the file under DB URL key in this my props key map. Config map contents are created and can be checked with this. We did that. You can describe the ports also. So actually let's check let's describe these ports as well. So let's see. It's a good idea. So let me come out of this port first. kubectl get port. This is the port. kubectl describe this DESCRIB port. This port, and this is the volume. This is the conditions, environment variables from. It has taken an environment variable from this my props key map. Right. This is what we had told in the YAML file. Right. If you saw the YAML file above, which I had shown somewhere, this one. So it's from the my props config map, and this is what it is showing. here my environment variables from my this config map, correct? This one, correct? And now let's go back to the slide, correct? So we can specify all options together. We discuss many options, right? There are many. Okay. Just thinking. So you can see here. You can see from file we are creating one. Apparently this file can have one key value. This file can have another key value. This file can have third key value, and this form literal can have another key and another value. So you can combine multiple options to create config map, right? So that's one. This I'm showing from the command line. You could always do it in the YAML file also. Once you create this config map, you can say config map kubectl config map get env config -YAML. It will show you the YAML which you could have used to create such environment variables instead of creating this from command lines. You could have used to create this config map from the YAML file instead of creating this config map content from the command line. Okay, I think I will stop here. Maybe we'll discuss this in detail in the next session. And this will be homework. I have not done this example of all the options. And yeah, so we'll go through this environment variable. We'll discuss volume also, how to create from volume. We'll see how to expose only few key values from config map. From the volume, how to mount the existing directory, permissions of the volume. Then you want to update the configurations, and then secrets. So let's see how much you can cover in the next meeting. Thank you very much for joining. We'll meet in the next session. Thank you.